my memory of my childhood was sad. I always longed for the love of my mother who passed away when I was 4 and whose face I don't remember as she left no photograph. Tony De Leon Pizarro. Tony De Leon Pizarro. The man behind the uniform. How a poor and orphan boy from the Philippines achieved financial and philanthropic success in America. By Simeon G. Silverio, Jr. The greatest achievement of the human spirit is to live up to one's opportunities and make the most of one's resources. Vauvenargues, French philosopher 1715–1747. Author's introduction. After just a few years in America, I met a Filipino-American associate professor in Asian American Studies at the San Diego State University. A graduate of Far Eastern University in the Philippines, University of Hawaii and Cornell University, he was, like me, interested in documenting the stories of Filipino Americans, especially in San Diego, California. For years, we have been dreaming of recording the personal stories of the early Filipino immigrants in San Diego, especially the Manongs and those who followed them. The idea, however, remained just a pipe dream. We did not act on it by actually sitting down and recording their stories, until these early San Diego Filipino Americans passed away one after another, the memories of their early struggling years in their adopted country, America, gone with them. It would have been easy to do so. All we had to do was sit down with them and record their stories on video, and the accounts of their American experiences would be preserved forever, to be viewed by the next generation, studied by students and scholars, and stored in the archives of history. Although dreamers, we were also immersed in the vortex of life. It was clear that raising our growing families turned the epic project into a fantasy shared by two grown men who, like bold kites that rise at noon, land back to earth in the end. Then just like that, it was over. One day, my Filipino-American professor friend, who wrote a column in the Asian Journal, the San Diego Filipino-American newspaper I published, was also gone. I knew Tony Pizarro was an ideal subject for the project. He is one of the most successful Filipinos in San Diego, California, where I am based. He rose through the ranks in the U.S. Navy and together with his wife Dr. Priscilla Pizarro, built a multi-million real estate and business empire. But Tony is a very humble guy. He would not want to hear about my proposal. He just wanted to stay in the background, satisfied in giving away part of his wealth to different charitable and religious projects. One day, during a chance encounter in a social gathering, he casually mentioned that as a young boy, he had to compete for food in their dinner table back home in Orphan, Bataan, a province of the Philippines. My widower father had 6 kids and he married a widow with 6 children of her own, and since I was the youngest and we were very poor, I was always left with no food to eat after it was placed on the dinner table, he remembered. That shocked me because I realized his story is more compelling than I thought. Can you imagine a poor boy whose mother passed away when he was 4, struggling from the beginning to become one of the richest Filipino Americans in San Diego? Definitely, his story has to be told if only to teach a lesson to poor young people who might one day turn out to be as successful as him. But although I kept pestering him, he kept shooing me away. I guess he must have had an epiphany. Perhaps he has had a health scare and had come to realize he was a mere mortal. That someday, any day, he might be gone. And what would his grandchildren think of him? A rich grandfather who doted on and spoiled them? Would they not have had profited more from a lesson taken from his life story? Without knowing their grandfather's unbelievable story, they would not be inspired to follow his example. Neither would they try as hard to overcome the obstacles they would encounter without having known their grandpa faced much more daunting challenges during his lifetime. Though he still had doubts, he called me and told me about it. This, I realized, was his Achilles' heels, the soft spot in his heart. So the next time I talked to him, I assured him by agreeing to write his life story, he would not appear like he was flaunting his wealth and bragging about his achievements. Think about the young people who would be inspired by your life story, I told him. If a poor orphan boy like Tony Pizarro can manage to become a success, how much would it be easier for them to attain a similar feat? Gradually, his heart softened and he half-heartedly agreed to do a series of interviews. I would not do this if not for you, he assured me. I've known and trusted you and your wife Jenny for years. Though that filled me with pride for a while, I was more excited and overwhelmed by the opportunity to tell his story to the world, and more importantly, to the present and future generations his life would inspire. Simeon G. Silverio, Jr. San Diego, California.
Chapter 1. Only in America a dream come true. I can't imagine a person becoming a success who doesn't give this game of life everything he's got. Walter Cronkite, broadcast journalist. It was August 9, 2009, when Tony DeLeon Pizarro, a retired Filipino-American United States Navy supply officer, successful businessman and philanthropist, woke up in his brand-new Tuscan-style villa, a mansion he built, at Fairbanks Ranch in Rancho Santa Fe, California, one of the most affluent and prestigious communities in the United States. He put on his robe, got off the bed, and stepped out of the spacious suite. His wife, Priscilla Santos Pizarro, a retired doctor of medicine, was still asleep. As he emerged from the room and on his way downstairs, he passed by the pictures of their grown children, Gerard and Wendy, hanging on the wall. Both are lawyers. Gerard has a successful legal practice in San Francisco and the CEO of RK Anywhere, while Wendy, a Harvard University Juris Doctor graduate, chose to move back to San Diego from San Francisco, where she now specializes in trusts and estates. It was the last leg of a legal tour de force that began when she attended college at Yale University, stayed on for a master's degree, and then proceeded to Oxford University in Cambridge, England for another degree. Both exemplary and ambitious, brother and sister established a law firm named California Law Partners in San Diego, California. Tony grabbed a hot latte and sauntered out of the door to his beautiful backyard. Sitting in a lounge chair next to the swimming pool, he savored the cool morning air as sunlight poured through the trees. It was the family's first morning in the new house. For many people, the villa symbolizes the pinnacle of success. The extraordinary world-class estate is serene, spacious, and has sophisticated elegance. Hidden by its rustic surroundings, Rancho Santa Fe, the gated enclave Tony now called home, stuns the imagination with amenities that include a superb equestrian center, tennis courts, lake activities, a putting green, volleyball, children playground, jogging trails, and a 10,000 Sesafaf clubhouse equipped with kitchen facilities. One of the richest men in the United States has a property in the area because one of his daughters is an accomplished equestrian. A gift to his wife, the Pizarro dream home was conceived in the mind of Tony in the mid-70s. It was an exciting time to build the ultimate legacy. With the coveted land in the Pizarro's name, Tony became abuzz with ideas of how their home would look like, how many bedrooms and bathrooms, or do they want a swimming pool or a basketball court with it, how big they would want their entertainment room to be. Not only that, the kids had grown up. Gerard was already in college, while Wendy was still at the University of San Diego High School. How will they build? The pieces were falling in place and the plan coming together. Trip to Spain, but it would take a serendipitous trip to Spain to seal the character of the home with the Pizarro family coat of arms. In July of 2002, Tony participated with the running of the bulls in Ciudad Pamplona, Spain, and on his way back to Madrid, he traveled as far back in Ciudad Trujillo, to which King John II of Spain had commissioned Francisco Javier Pizarro to travel to South America, and where he became the conquistador of Peru. That was in 1643. During Tony's visit, he met the present older Pizarro family still living in the city of Trujillo. As a souvenir of his fortuitous visit, he brought home with him the Pizarro family coat of arms and family crest. He had the family crest, bearing 2 bears and a tree, signifying peace and sincerity, placed in every window of his house. While he could not prove direct lineage to the great historical figure, his family in Orion, Bataan in the Philippines being poor farmers as far as his kinfolk could remember, he nonetheless claimed affinity by way of the shared last name. The Pizarro estate sits on a 1.5 acre of elevated land amongst other properties. It has a 14,000 cfaf of livable space to include a guest house. It has 8 bedrooms and 8.5 bathrooms, a luxurious home theater, a spacious chairman of the board library, a doctor's office, his wife being a physician, a putting green, a custom-built rock-heated swimming pool with a spa, a temperature-controlled wine room, a BQ pit equipped with an open fire pit, 5 private patios, a 4-car garage, a covered entranceway, 4 elegant fireplaces, informal family rooms, private grandson rooms, a formal and informal dining room, an elegant formal receiving room. It also offers a private cigar lounge patio and exercise pad. The house itself is equipped with Sub-Zero high-end appliances and 5 stations of air conditioning and heating units. Every room is wired for Wi-Fi, music, and intercom systems. A master builder of dreams, Tony had built a magical estate as his gift for his wife, Dr. Priscilla Santos Pizarro, for her continued support that spanned a lifetime of standing by her husband's impossible dreams that came true. Philanthropic endeavors. Tony Pizarro's success in business also enabled him to indulge in the family's philanthropic endeavors. In 2008, the family, with the help of other kababayans, Filipino countrymen, built the Santos Pizarro Gawad Kalinga Village, Giving Care, donating 42 homes for the poorest of the poor in their hometown in Orphan, Bataan, in the Philippines. Gawad Kalinga is a nationwide social project headed by Tony Melodo that encourages people to build free housing for the poor in the Philippines as well as in other parts of the world. In 2010, his wife Priscilla donated $100,000 to her alma mater, the University of Santo Tomas Medical School in Manila. The family's other charitable projects include the cleaning up of the Orion River in their hometown, the building of 2 Catholic chapels, the family's participation in free medical missions to the Philippines and Vietnam for 19 years, the cleaning up of the Bataan Death March markers, and the launching of multiple scholarships and book drives. On April 1, 2005, Tony was invited by the principal of his high school alma mater, Jose Rizal Institute, to be the guest speaker in its graduation ceremonies. Before the event, he asked for a quick tour of the school. After seeing the best classroom, Tony was taken to the worst room. The sight of his former classroom, where he spent many school hours, brought back many sad and fond memories to him. Tony sat down in the same desk assigned to him in high school and for a moment reflected on his high school days. Tears came out of his eyes. The principal and the staff watched in silence as Tony uttered to himself a thankful and solemn prayer to God, for he felt so lucky he was able to join the U.S. Navy, which enabled him to become a success while his other classmates were not. After the tour, Tony thanked the principal and her staff. As a gesture of gift-giving back, Tony gave her a 100,000 pesos, 2,000 check, for the renovation and improvement of the school to make it more conducive to learning for the future students of his town. Another beneficiary of Tony and Priscilla Pizarro's philanthropy is the Divine Mercy Foundation of Southern California, whose mission is to build a Divine Mercy site in Encinitas, California. The couple donated over $75,000 and plan to donate more to the project. Their latest charitable endeavor is with Better Life for Better Future, BLBF, a social project that feeds, educates, houses, and mentors poor children, including those from indigenous tribes in the Philippines. BLBF is also training and mentoring the children in job skills and livelihood projects. The plan is to put up similar projects in the Pizarro hometown of Orphan, Bataan, financed by the Pizarro couple. Dirt poor. It is hard to imagine that Tony Pizarro was able to achieve these successes since he grew up quite literally dirt poor. He lost his mother when he was 4 years old. His father, already with 6 children of his own, remarried. She was also a widow who herself had 6 children. Still, the couple bore another child, Tony's stepsister Aure Pizarro, further increasing the brood and lessening resources. It was Brady Bunch before the popular TV show in the 1980s was aired. With so many mouths to feed in a household with already very limited resources, Tony ended up with whatever was left for him to eat, since the eldest in the brood always took the first crack at the food available and down the line. He was lucky whenever there were viand left for him, so oftentimes he had to flavor his rice with condiments, usually drops of patis, fish sauce. He was transferred to the care of one relative to another until he became old enough to join the U.S. Navy, enabling him to take control of his own destiny. All he needed was a chance, which he embraced to the fullest with his talent, hard work, and perseverance. As a result of his industry and foresight, Tony was able to help himself and other people, and in the process, achieve the ultimate American dream.
Chapter 2: Clouds of War. Born in the wrong place at the wrong time. All people are equal. It is not birth, it is virtue alone that makes the difference. Voltaire, French writer and philosopher. 1940 was an auspicious year to be born. A war had been raging in Europe for almost 4 years. Adolf Hitler, with the army of the Third Reich, had invaded and conquered France and its neighboring countries. Although the United States had steadfastly tried to remain neutral, it was only 3 months after Tony Pizarro was born on September 10, 1940, in Orphan, Bataan, that the Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft would bomb Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and decimate the Pacific Fleet. It was a day which will live in infamy, as then U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt described the treachery that dragged America to the fray, thereby snagging the Commonwealth of the Philippines, then a U.S. colony, into the quagmire of World War II, one of the worst human experiences the world would ever encounter. The birth of a baby boy was supposed to be a moment of celebration. One doubts whether this was the case in the Pizarro household, since the poor father and his wife already had 5 children to feed and take care of. At that time, family planning and birth control were unheard of. The children were welcomed as they came, considered as they should be as blessings from God. Having a child, or as in the case of Tony's family, 6 children, was not a matter of choice, but that of destiny. It was typical for families then to have 5 to 12 children. How they were going to be fed and raised was a question not asked, for as always, they believe God will provide. Just a few hours after Pearl Harbor was treacherously bombed, hundreds of Japanese Zero fighter planes dropped bombs in military installations in the main island of Luzon. The United States had occupied the Philippines because its former master, Spain, pinned by the outbreak of revolution in its colony after its 400-year rule, had sold the country to the United States for $20,000 under the Treaty of Paris in 1898. This was in spite of the fact that the Filipinos, under revolutionary leader General Emilio Aguinaldo, declared Philippine independence in 1896 for having won their freedom after their decisive military victories against Spain. Unfortunately, the event coincided with the Spanish-American War, wherein the United States won from Spain not only its Mexican territories, but its Philippine colony as well. To deny validity to the Filipinos' Declaration of Independence, a mock naval battle between the Spanish Armada and the American naval forces under Admiral George Dewey was staged in Manila Bay. When the American landed in the country, the Filipino-American War ensued. The Filipinos fought heroically with their outdated, if not primitive weapons, against the modern military hardware of the Americans. Savage brutalities, worse than what the Viet Cong, the rebel guerrillas in Vietnam, suffered in the hands of the Americans, were inflicted on the hapless Filipinos. The Americans occupied the Philippines, teaching the country the concept of democracy and introducing such institutions as the public health system, education, and Western civilization. When World War II broke out, the Filipinos were conscripted to serve under the United States Armed Forces in the Far East. General Douglas MacArthur, the American military leader in the Philippines at that time, chose the tip of Bataan in Mariveles and the island of Corregidor as the main bulwarks of defense. Thousands of American and Filipino soldiers, as well as military machineries, were concentrated in them in preparation for the ultimate defense of the country. Unfortunately, the invading military might of the Japanese Imperial Army was too much for the USAF forces to resist, resulting in the capture of thousands of American and Filipino soldiers prisoners of war. Little did the people of Bataan know that their province would be the setting for one of the most brutal atrocities of the war, when hundreds of American and Filipino prisoners of war would be forced by their Japanese captors to march from Mariveles to the Japanese concentration camps in Capas, Tarlac, a distance of 141 kilometers. Those who fell along the way due to heat, exhaustion, hunger, and injuries were stabbed and killed with bayonets. Thus, it would be remembered in history as the infamous Death March, one of the cruelest acts of man to his fellowmen. The march was payback for the fierce resistance the outnumbered defenders inflicted upon the 20,000-strong army, reducing them to a tenth of their size in the initial invasion and forcing them to turn back. One account described it as a symbol of democracy and freedom, a memorial to the gallant Filipino-American defenders of Bataan who fought decisive battles that delayed the timetable of the well-equipped and better-trained Japanese imperial forces and changed the course of history in the Pacific. Tony Pizarro's birthplace, Orion, Bataan, is a coastal municipality with a land area of 65.41 square kilometers or 25.25 square miles, which constitutes 4.76% of Bataan's total area. How Orion got its name remains a matter of speculation. Some residents claim it was first called Udyong, from the words Luad and Uryong. It meant muddy, since the place was muddy and swampy at that time. Others subscribe to the popular story that during the Spanish times, some Spanish soldiers passed by the town and asked the natives in a rice field the name of the place. One of the soldiers pointed his finger to the ground and asked, "¿Qué es el llama pueblo?" Not understanding Spanish, the people thought the soldier was referring to something he saw on the ground that happens to be a worm. They hurriedly answered, "Uadyon," referring to the worm. When the soldiers heard the word, they thought the citizens were referring to the name of the town and left the place mumbling to themselves, Uadyon. Thus, the town was known as Udyong and was later changed to Orion. There is no record of the date of official recognition of the municipality of Orion. However, records showed that this municipality was founded by a Dominican on April 30th, 1667. It was said that on September 16th, 1852, a strong earthquake shook the whole archipelago and destroyed the parochial church, which was later rebuilt by the parish priest of the place at that time, Fr. Ulpiano Herrera. 40 years later, in 1892, a big fire practically burned the whole town, with only 3 houses remaining. Fr. Jose Campomanes tried to reconstruct the town from the ashes and ruins of the fire and transformed it into a beautiful and prosperous one, signaling the beginning of progress. Orion is 132 kilometers from Manila and approximately 31.2 nautical miles across Manila Bay. It is about 8 kilometers from Balanga, the provincial capital, and bounded on the north by Pilar and Limay on the south. It has a total land area of 6,540 hectares and covers 23 barangays. Records show the municipality has a land area of 65.41 square kilometers or 25.25 square miles, constituting 4.76% of Bataan's total area. According to the 2015 census, its population was 56,002, representing 7.36% of the total population of Bataan province, or 0.50% of the overall population of the central Luzon region. The population density, based on these figures, is computed at 856 inhabitants per square kilometer, or 2,218 inhabitants per square mile. Among the historical figures born in Orion were Cayetano Arellano, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was born on March 2, 1847, and Francisco Balagtas, dubbed as the greatest Filipino poet and author of the renowned Florante at Laura. He married Juana Tiambeng, a pretty lass of Orion, and lived here from July 1842 to February 1862. Bataan was obscure and relatively unknown before World War II. It was founded in 1754 by Governor-General Pedro Manuel Arandia. The region was divided into 2 parts, the Corregimiento of Mariveles and the province of Pampanga. The towns of Mariveles, Bagak, Morong, and Maragondong, Cavite comprised the Corregimiento of Mariveles, which was under the jurisdiction of the Recollect Order of the Roman Catholic Church. The province of Pampanga included the towns of Orion, Pilar, Balanga, Abuque, Samal, Orani, Lana Hermosa, and San Juan de Dinalupihan. The group was under the charge of the Dominican Order. The Dominicans founded Abuque on June 10, 1588, Samal on April 30, 1641, Orion April 30, 1667, Orani and Balanga on April 21, 1714, Lana Hermosa May 8, 1756, and Pilar March 10, 1901. The 3 towns on the western side, Mariveles, Bagak, and Morong, were founded by the Franciscans in about 1578. Among the significant historical events that happened in Bataan were, in 1574, the dreaded Chinese pirate Limahong used Lusong Point at the western side of Bataan as a landing place. In 1647, the Dutch naval forces perpetrated the Abuque massacre. and the Bataan Death March to Capas, Tarlac started in the municipalities of Mariveles and Bagac. Today, touching commemorative shrines are dedicated to the memory of those who resisted the Japanese occupation. A bayonet thrust into the ground with a helmet symbolically slung over the rifle butt to mark the start of the Death March, and the imposing Dambana ng Kagitingan on top of Mount Samat in Pilar, Bataan. Indeed, Tony Pizarro was born in the wrong place at the wrong time. The time of his birth was the beginning of the most horrific human experience in Philippines history, when millions of Filipinos would suffer atrocities, hardships, and death. Bataan was ground zero of the Japanese military invasion and atrocities.
Chapter 3. Saint Tolentino. A Father's Love. Fortunately for me, I had a father who didn't let us get away with anything. You were taught respect, and you were taught to be humble. That has a lot to do with how I am now, because I'm still scared of my dad. Benjamin Watson. The loud cry of a newborn baby was heard from a small house in Barangay Dangbailolo, Orphan, Bataan. The date, September 10, 1940. It was an inauspicious beginning for the baby boy, later to be known as Tony Pizarro. Dark clouds of the raging European war were threatening to engulf the world, including a small Pacific country called the Philippines, where Orphan is located. Just 3 months later, the American naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii would be bombed by the Japanese Imperial Army, which dragged America and its protectorate, the Philippines, into the conflict, signaling the start of the Second World War. The parents, Bernardo Sabino Pizarro and Esther Mateo de Leon, a poor fisherman/farmer and housewife with little education, were already raising 5 small children, and the 6th would definitely add to the burden of feeding them all. The war and his family's poverty, plus the large number of siblings, had certainly given Tony a bad hand in life. It meant he would have had to pursue success at a disadvantage. As if this was not enough, his mother would soon die of malaria when he was 4 years old, literally leaving him to fend for himself. Indeed, if one was a betting man, one would not have given Tony a chance to succeed. At best, he would have been doomed to become a poor farmer like his ancestors and live in poverty for the rest of his life. And who would have ever thought that such a poor boy from a large family would one day end up a multimillionaire in America and the admired benefactor of several charities? And yet, to the surprise of many, he overcame the initial obstacles and achieved what was inconceivable of him. Even in birth, no sign of favor rested upon him. Tony was not born in a hospital where nurses and doctors would have cared for him and monitored his vital signs, thus ensuring his survival. Instead, he was delivered by a Hilat, the local village healer, skilled in the use of folk medicine, who would have used her bare hands to massage, Hilat means massage, the mother's belly in ushering the birth of a child, and, days later, massage the mother's belly to maneuver her puson, uterus, back to shape after birth. It was the common practice among many households in the area at that time, especially among poor rural families. Therefore, in spite of the Hilat's lack of academic qualifications in healthcare, his parents trusted her. It was not only because they had no choice, as she was the only one they could afford, but because the Hilat also possessed skills in the indigenous healing arts. After all, she had successfully delivered all of the couple's first 5 children. Tony was christened Tolentino de Leon Pizarro. He was named after Saint Tolentino, the patron saint of the souls in the purgatory. At that time, Filipinos, who were mostly Catholics, named their children after saints. But Tolentino was not a common moniker, especially among the Filipinos. In fact, hardly anyone has heard of anybody named Tolentino. Nonetheless, it was the name his parents chose for him. How he ended up being called Tony Pizarro is an interesting story that would be told later. Tony's father, Bernardo Sabino Pizarro, was 35 at the time of his final son's birth. With 5 children before Tony, he must have married when he was only 25, with fishing and farming his only means of supporting his growing family, for he had little formal education. But people then did not care much about their financial future, for they believed they would survive like everyone else they knew who was in the same situation. He was born on August 17, 1905 in Orphan, Bataan, where he raised his family and spent the rest of his life. Despite his poverty and lack of education, he managed to become a politician in later years, having been elected as a town councillor for 1 term. He was kind and helpful when needed, Tony remembered of him. He would give away things, even the food he was about to eat, when asked. Despite his father's generosity and social skills as a politician, Tony admitted he was not close to him. We never had a father-to-child chat, and I never felt the warmth of his love. He would never ask how I was doing, especially since I was one of the youngest in a household of 13 children. Nevertheless, Tony did feel his father's love in the later years when his father insisted that he continue his studies at the Far Eastern University in Manila despite the fact it was obvious the family could not afford to support him financially. In fact, unbeknownst to Tony's family, he had passed all the requirements to enter the United States Navy. It was his Auntie Isabel, younger sister of his father, who had to beg and plead with his father to allow him to quit his studies and abandon his dream of becoming a medical doctor by signing the required permission documents. The papers were supposed to be submitted to the U.S. Naval Station, recruiting officer at Sangley Point, Cavite City before Tony could be officially admitted to the U.S. Navy. The father told his sister Isabel that his son was too young, being only 18 years old. He even said that Tony was the only one among his children who had the intellect, ambition, and brains to pursue a professional career, one with the capacity to earn a college degree. It was his dream, just like any parent in the Philippines at that time. Tony's grandfather was Severino Pizarro from Pilar, Bataan, and a neighboring town who was married to Martha Mateo Sabino of Orion, Bataan. Tony's father Bernardo was their third son. Their other children were Primitivo, married to Ella, Francisco, married to Nene, Isabel, single, and Teodoro, married to Sinyang. Two of their other daughters, Paz and Dolores, passed away when Tony was very young. He was a very simple man, Tony remembered his father. In addition to being an owner of backlad, a fence-like enclosure made of strips of bamboo placed near the shore to raise and entrap fish, he was also engaged in some trades, like buying bamboo trees which he would cut with the help of Simeon, a friend, and sell them at retail prices. Bamboo at that time was very popular and used in building houses, backlad, and other structures. Lumber would not be available until years later. When I was growing up, I remember my father as a strict disciplinarian, Tony said about his father. Whenever any of his children violated the house rules, all of us would be punished. He would call and order his children to lie face down on the bamboo floor, from the eldest to the youngest. He would give them a sermon that would last for several minutes, but for reasons unknown to Tony, he would not identify the culprit. Once he was finished and sure we understood his message, he would hit us one after another on our buttocks with his belt or yantak mindoro, cane made of rattan, Tony remembered. Since I was the youngest, I would be hit the lightest while the one who committed the violation would be hit twice as hard. Tony's father's backlad was in Barrio Pulongbato, Mountain of Rocks. He remembered his father bringing him along at 4 o'clock in the morning together with a dozen men with paddles in their hands. Aboard a boat, they would go to the backlad located 2 miles from the shore and would cast their nets to catch the fish inside the contraption. The fish would then be brought to the public market to be sold. I remembered the local residents lining up to get free fish generously given by the boat captain, Tony said. That's how people helped each other at that time. It was called Baka syndrome for Filipinos. This must have given Tony an earlier lesson not to be selfish and help people, especially the poor. The involvement of Tony's father in politics, which was his proudest achievement, was also his doom. After serving one term as a town councillor, he ran for mayor in November of 1962. With lack of higher education, he was pitted against a Mr. Ricardo Angeles, a provincial agriculturist in Bataan. The disparity in their educational achievements was obvious, not to mention Tony's father's lack of funds. He lost in the mayoral elections by only 67 votes, which he took so hard he suffered a heart attack at the age of 57. He remained bedridden until he passed away at the age of 68 years old. It was a lesson learned that I would never forget, Tony vowed. One must not enter politics and underestimate the value of education.